Welcome, dear listener, to this channel where stories of family sacrifice and hidden truths come alive. If these tales move your heart, I invite you to subscribe and stay with me, because what you're about to hear may change the way you look at love and loyalty forever. Title of today's story: I paid $150 zero in hospital bills to save my grandson's life, and then my own daughter told me I wasn't worthy of seeing him. My name is Max. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life I worked as a mechanic in a small town shop on the edge of Ohio. Grease has been under my fingernails since I was a boy. My back aches when the rain comes. My hands are scarred from years of fixing other people's cars so they could get to work, take their kids to school, live their lives. I never built a fortune, but I built a name: honest work, fair prices, and a handshake that meant something. Then came the phone call. It was just past midnight when the ringing cut through the silence of my tiny rented apartment. On the other end, my daughter's voice trembled with panic. Her son, my grandson, was in the hospital. An infection had spread too far too fast. The doctor said he needed surgery immediately, and insurance would only cover a fraction of the cost. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking, "they say it'll take at least $150,000. If we don't pay, they won't move forward." I sat there frozen, the phone pressed to my ear. $150,000? For me, it might as well have been a mountain made of stone. I'd never seen that kind of money in my entire life. But this was my grandson. The boy I had bounced on my knee, the boy whose first steps I had filmed on an old camcorder. The boy who once looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes and said, "Grandpa, will you always be there for me?" How could I say no? My chest tightened, and I could feel the weight of every year of labor pressing down on me. My savings were small, my house already mortgaged, my health not what it once was. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. I told my daughter, steady and firm, "I'll find the money. Don't you worry. Your boy will get that surgery." And that night, while the town slept, I began making calls, banks, old acquaintances, anyone who might lend a hand. I signed papers I barely read, loans with interest rates that would chain me for the rest of my life. I sold the last piece of land. My father left me the only inheritance I had. Each signature felt like I was slicing away another piece of myself. By dawn, the hospital had the funds. My grandson's life would be spared. And I thought I had secured not just his survival, but I had no idea then that the same child I had nearly bankrupted myself to save would become the wall my own daughter used to push me out of her life. The hospital lights always feel colder at night. They hum above you, steady and unbending, as if to remind you that pain doesn't sleep. I sat in the waiting room with a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone bitter hours ago. My daughter paced the hallway, her arms folded tight, her phone buzzing every few minutes with calls from her husband, from friends, from people I barely knew. But no one looked at me. No one asked if I was all right. I was just the old man in the corner, grease-stained hands clasped together like a man praying to a god who might have stopped listening years ago. Through the window of the pediatric intensive care unit, I caught glimpses of my grandson. Wires and tubes snaked around his small body. Machines beeped rhythmically, each sound a reminder that money had bought him time. My money. My sacrifices. I whispered to myself, "Hang in there, kiddo. Grandpa's got you." Hours turned into a blur. Doctors came and went, explaining things in medical terms I barely understood: sepsis, IV, antibiotics, surgical procedures. I nodded, pretending to follow, even though the weight of it all crushed me. The only number I understood was $150 zero, and I carried it like a stone inside my chest. When the surgeon finally came out, still in scrubs, his face was tired but calm. "The operation went well," he said. Relief washed over my daughter as she collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to hold her, to tell her everything would be all right. But she brushed past me, rushing to call her husband instead. I stood there, invisible, the man who had just signed away his future, reduced to a shadow in his own family's story. That night, I stayed in the hospital longer than anyone else. I sat by my grandson's bedside when visiting hours technically ended and no nurse had the heart to move me. His tiny hand rested in mine, pale and weak, but alive. I thought about the years I had spent saving for retirement, the little nest egg I'd built. It was all gone now, scattered like autumn leaves in the wind. My future was no longer my own. It belonged to him. And yet in that sterile hospital room, I didn't regret a thing, because when his eyelids fluttered open and he whispered Grandpa through the haze of anesthesia, I knew I had done the only thing a grandfather could do. But even then, something unsettled lingered in the air. The way my daughter avoided meeting my eyes. The way her husband never once thanked me. Gratitude should have filled that room like sunlight. Instead, I felt a draft of something colder, a shadow that told me this sacrifice, this act of love, would not bind us closer. It would somehow push us further apart. A week later, the hospital smell still clung to my clothes, antiseptic plastic gloves, and that faint metallic tang of fear. My grandson was recovering stronger with each day, and that should have been the miracle we all celebrated. But in my daughter's home, the air was different. They had invited me over for dinner, or at least that's what I told myself. Truthfully, I think I invited myself. I just wanted to sit at the table to hear my grandson's laughter again, to remind myself that all that money had bought more than machines and hospital beds. It had bought him more birthdays. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it, the stiffness. My daughter Emma gave me a polite smile, the kind you give a stranger at the grocery store. Her husband Daniel barely looked up from his phone. During dinner, I tried to talk about the old times, how Emma used to climb the big oak tree in our yard, how she once begged me for a puppy I couldn't afford. Stories meant to bring warmth, to remind her of the bond we once had. But she shifted in her chair, uncomfortable, while Daniel cut me off with small talk about mortgage rates and job promotions. I swallowed the bitterness with my mashed potatoes. Later that evening, as I walked past the kitchen on my way to leave, I heard their voices hushed but sharp. "He can't keep hanging around here," Daniel muttered. "He just wants to help," Emma replied softly. "We don't need him reminding everyone that he paid the bills. It makes us look weak. People will think we couldn't handle it ourselves. Daniel, he's my dad, your poor dad. That's what everyone will see." I froze. The words hit me harder than any punch I'd ever taken. Poor. As if the sum of my life, my sacrifices, my work could be boiled down to that single word. I stood in the dark hallway, clutching my worn jacket, my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. For a moment I considered stepping in, confronting them, demanding gratitude. But then I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Gray hair, calloused hands, tired eyes, and I stayed silent. Because the truth was, Daniel wasn't wrong. I was poor now. Every cent I had saved was gone, funneled into hospital bills. My daughter's family was secure, and I had nothing left. Still, I walked out that door, quietly letting the cold night air swallow me. My boots crunched on the driveway gravel as I told myself, this is family. You do what you must, even if it costs you everything. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. A seed that whispered, was it love they saw in me, or just a wallet to be emptied a few weeks later? Emma called to tell me that my grandson was finally well enough to come home from the hospital. My heart leapt with joy. I imagined balloons, laughter, the smell of cake in the air. A homecoming. Surely this would be my chance to see his smile again, to feel those little arms around my neck. I stopped by the store on the way to their house. I bought a small toy truck, bright red, the kind that makes engine sounds when you push the button. I couldn't afford much else, but I figured a boy doesn't care how much a gift costs, only that it comes from someone who loves him. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed the line of cars parked along the street. Family, friends, neighbors, it looked like half the town had been invited. My chest swelled with pride. He made it. He's alive, and everyone is here to celebrate. I knocked on the door, gift in hand. Laughter floated out from inside. The smell of barbecue wafted through the air. But when the door opened, it wasn't Emma. It was Daniel. His face dropped the moment he saw me. "Max," he said flatly. "Hey there," I answered with a smile I tried to make warm. "I came to see my grandson. I brought him something." I held up the truck. Daniel stepped outside, pulling the door nearly shut behind him. "Look, this isn't a good time." I blinked. "What do you mean he's home?" "Everyone's here." "Yeah," he said, lowering his voice. Everyone we invited. The words hit me like a slap. I tried to laugh it off. You must be joking. Emma would want me here. I paid. I stopped myself. I hated how that sentence wanted to finish. I paid the bills. I didn't want to be that man. Daniel's jaw tightened. Max, listen, we're grateful, but this isn't about you. We don't want people asking questions wondering why the old man who doesn't have two nickels to rub together is always hanging around. Emma's worked hard to build a life here, and you showing up like this, it doesn't fit the picture. I stood there on the porch, my fingers curling around the toy truck until the plastic squeaked. Inside, I heard my grandson's laugh, bright, full, alive. The laugh I had fought for, borrowed for, sacrificed everything for. And I was being told I wasn't welcome to hear it in person. I swallowed hard. So you're saying I can't come in? Daniel didn't look me in the eye. He just gave a quick shake of his head. The door shut, leaving me on the porch with my reflection in the glass. The red truck weighed heavy in my hand. For the first time in years, I felt like a ghost, alive but unseen. I set the toy down gently on the step, rang the bell once, and walked back to my car without looking over my shoulder. The laughter inside carried on without me, and in that moment I realized something bitter saving my grandson's life had bought me debt, loneliness, and silence, but not a seat at the table. The drive home that night felt longer than the 20 miles it really was. The headlights carved pale tunnels through the dark, but all I could see in my mind was that front door shutting in my face. My grandson's laughter still rang in my ears, sweet, unknowing, untouched by the bitterness of adults. I pulled into my driveway, the same old gravel crunching under the tires, and sat in the car with the engine off. The silence was deafening. My house, once filled with the chatter of family dinners, the clinking of plates, the warmth of holidays, had turned into four walls and an echo. I walked inside, dropped my coat on the chair, and stared at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. Medical loans, interest, minimum payments that would take me into the grave before the balance ever reached zero. I had traded 20 more years of my life for that boy's future, and yet I couldn't even sit at the table to watch him eat a slice of cake. I made myself a cup of instant coffee, cheap, bitter nothing like the fresh brew my late wife Carol used to make on Sunday mornings. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and let myself drift back to her voice. You always give too much, Max, she used to say, half scolding, half admiring. But that's who you are. You don't know how to hold back when it comes to the people you love. I smiled through the sting of tears. She would told me to keep my head high. She would reminded me that money doesn't measure the worth of a man, his sacrifices do. Still, the ache wouldn't leave. I picked up the phone, thought about calling Emma. Maybe she hadn't known what Daniel said at the door. Maybe she'd tell me it was a mistake. My thumb hovered over her number, but I couldn't press it. Deep down, I feared the truth she had known. Instead, I scrolled to an old friend, Tom, a mechanic buddy I'd worked alongside for 30 years. The man who'd been with me through layoffs, busted engines, and Friday night beers. I typed out a message, then deleted it. What could I even say? Hey, Tom saved my grandson's life, but I'm not good enough to see him now. I set the phone down. My pride wouldn't let me share it. Not yet. I sat there until the coffee went cold, staring at the truck keys on the counter, staring at the bills, staring at the empty chair across from me where Carol used to sit. And in the stillness, one thought kept circling. Was I truly invisible now? A man's sacrifice forgotten the moment it was no longer convenient. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. For 2 days, I carried the weight of silence. Every hour that passed, I fought the urge to pick up the phone. But on the third night, just after midnight, I gave in. The house was too quiet, my thoughts too loud. I dialed Emma's number. She answered on the third ring. Dad, her voice was cautious, like she had expected this moment but wished it wouldn't come. I swallowed hard. Emma, I need to ask you something. Was it you who told Daniel to keep me out the other night? Or did he decide that on his own? The silence stretched. I could hear her breathing, could picture her hand pressed to her forehead, wrestling with the truth. Finally, she whispered, Dad, it was both of us. Her words cut deeper than any knife. I had braced myself for Daniel's arrogance, his coldness, but hearing it from my little girl, The same one I carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the same one I stayed up nights tutoring in math, so she wouldn't fail, nearly dropped me to my knees. Emma, I said, my voice shaking, I gave up everything I had to make sure your boy could live. Do you understand that $150,000 money I'll be paying off until I'm gone? And you think I'm not worthy of seeing him, Dad? It's not that simple, she snapped, her voice rising. Daniel thinks it looks bad when you show up like you do. He says people will talk, that it reflects on us. He doesn't want what I cut in my throat burning. Doesn't want his friends to know his wife's father is broke, that I drive a beat-up Ford instead of a Lexus, that I wear clothes from Walmart instead of some fancy department store. Her silence answered me louder than words. I let out a bitter laugh, though nothing about it was funny. Emma, when you were 10 years old, your mother and I pawned our wedding rings to pay for your braces. Do you remember that smile you flashed at your first dance recital? We thought it was worth it. Every sacrifice was worth it. And now you're telling me I'm an embarrassment. Dad, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't make this harder than it already is. My chest tightened, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. Harder, Emma, this isn't hard. This is betrayal. Blood doesn't turn its back on blood. I couldn't say more. My voice broke. I ended the call before she could reply. I sat in that empty kitchen with the phone still in my hand, tears streaking my face. For the first time in 58 years, I felt like a man who truly had nothing left, not money, not respect, and worst of all, not even the love of the daughter I once believed would always stand by me. The morning after that call with Emma, I sat on my porch, staring out at the frost, collecting along the edges of my lawn. My old Ford sat in the driveway, the hood still carrying a streak of rust I'd meant to sand down years ago. For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of it, not because of what it was, but because of what my own daughter now saw when she looked at me. I couldn't bring myself to eat. The fridge hummed in the kitchen, half-empty shelves staring back at me when I opened it. My mind replayed Emma's words over and over. It was both of us. By noon, I drove to the grocery store more for the noise of people than for food. I pushed my cart slowly through the aisles, grabbing bread, milk, and a pack of instant noodles, cheap, filling all I could afford after another loan payment. At the checkout, the cashier, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, but a warm smile, looked at me and said, "You doing all right today, sir? You look a little worn down." Her words nearly undid me. No one had asked me that in weeks. Not Emma. Not Daniel. Certainly not the friends who had stopped calling once they realized I had nothing left to offer. I forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just long days, I suppose." She gave me a look, the kind only people who've been through storms recognize. She didn't press, but as she bagged my groceries, she added quietly, "Hard times don't last forever. Good men make it through. My dad used to tell me that." Her kindness, so small, yet so human, cracked something open inside me. I nodded, my throat tightening, and muttered, "Thank you. You don't know how much I needed to hear that." Driving home, I realized how low I had sunk, that the comfort of a stranger at a checkout line meant more to me than the voice of my own daughter. But maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes blood turns cold, and sometimes compassion shows up in unexpected places. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and took out a notebook. On the first page, I wrote down every dollar I owed for the hospital bills. On the second, I wrote one sentence: "If my family won't remember what I did, then I'll make sure the world does." It wasn't a plan yet. It was just a spark. But it was enough to keep me from drowning. The next morning, I woke with the notebook still on the kitchen table, my pen resting across the half-written page. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel paralyzed. The words I'd scrawled, "If my family won't remember what I did, then I'll make sure the world does," pulled at me like a challenge. I pulled on my jacket and drove across town to the small diner where I used to meet old friends for coffee after church. The neon sign buzzed faintly, and the smell of bacon and burnt toast hit me as soon as I opened the door. "Max," a familiar voice called. It was George, an old coworker from the auto shop. His hair had gone almost entirely gray, and his belly had filled out since retirement, but his eyes were still sharp. "Haven't seen you in ages. Sit." I slid into the booth, and before I knew it, the words started pouring out: the hospital bills, the loans, the night I signed away everything, just to save my grandson and the cold dismissal from Emma and Daniel afterward. George listened without interrupting, his hands folded over his coffee mug. When I finally stopped, my voice hoarse, he shook his head slowly. Max, you've always been a good man. Too good, maybe. But letting them write you out of the story, no. You need to tell people what you did. Not for pity, for truth. For dignity. The words landed deep. Truth. Dignity. I'd given up my livelihood, my comfort, and my future for my family. And now, sitting across from George, I realized I didn't just owe myself the truth, I owed it to my grandson. Someday, he deserved to know who had been there for him when it mattered. George leaned forward, lowering his voice. You remember my niece, Sarah? She's a journalist now. Local paper. She writes those human interest pieces. Maybe she'd listen. For a moment, fear gripped me. The thought of airing my family's betrayal in public made my stomach twist. But then, I thought of the blank stares, the rejection, the way Emma's voice had broken when she told me I wasn't worthy of seeing her son. Give me her number, I said. George scribbled it on a napkin and pushed it across the table. She's tough but fair. Tell her everything. Let the truth breathe, Max. I drove home with that napkin tucked carefully in my wallet. It felt heavier than money, heavier than the debts stacked against me. For the first time, I had a lifeline, not from my daughter, not from my son-in-law, but from an old friend who refused to let me fade into silence. That night, I dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a steady professional voice answered. This is Sarah. I cleared my throat, heart pounding. Hi, Sarah. You don't know me, but my name is Max, and I think I have a story you'll want to hear. Sarah's voice was calm but direct. Go ahead, Mr. Max. Tell me what happened. I sat in my dim kitchen, the clock ticking louder than usual. For a moment, I almost hung up. The shame of admitting out loud that my own daughter had cast me aside felt unbearable. But then I thought of my grandson's little hand wrapped around mine in the hospital, how his fragile body fought to breathe. I couldn't stay silent. So I told her everything. I told her about the night Emma called frantic, her voice breaking as she said her baby couldn't wait for insurance or paperwork. I told her how I'd emptied my savings signed loans. I had no business signing and scraped together $150 zero to cover the hospital bills. And after he pulled through, I said, my voice shaking, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd look at me differently. Maybe they'd remember who stood in the gap for them. But when I asked to see him, Emma looked me in the eye and said I wasn't good enough. That being poor made me unfit to be a grandfather. Silence filled the line. I thought she'd hung up. But then Sarah spoke, her voice softer now. Max, that's heartbreaking. And you're right, it is a story. But before I move forward, you need to understand something. If I publish this, your family won't forgive you. They'll deny it. They'll smear you if they have to. Are you ready for that? I gripped the phone tighter. My kitchen walls seemed to close in around me. I've already lost them, I said finally. What else can they take from me? At least this way the truth won't die with me. I heard her sigh, followed by the rapid clack of a keyboard. All right, but I'll need proof. Documents, receipts, bank statements, anything that shows what you did. I have it all, I said quickly. I'd kept the paperwork in a worn folder on top of my fridge, maybe out of habit, maybe out of desperation. Then let's meet, Sarah said. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Corner Cafe on Elm Street. Bring everything. And Max, bring your courage, too. This is bigger than you think. When the call ended, I set the phone down slowly. My hands trembled not from fear alone, but from something sharper, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time since Emma had turned me away, I felt like someone was willing to see me not as a burden, not as a broken man, but as the person who had given everything and been discarded. Tomorrow, my truth would step out of the shadows. The corner cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon rolls. It was the kind of place where young people buried themselves in laptops, earbuds, tucked in, pretending the world outside didn't exist. I stood near the door for a moment, clutching the worn folder in my hands. My palms were sweaty, and I felt older than 58. I spotted her, Sarah. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, hair tucked behind her ears, eyes sharp but kind. She waved me over. "Mr. Max," she greeted, sliding her laptop aside. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the chair opposite her, the folder between us like a fragile secret. "Just Max," I corrected softly. "I am nobody important." "Not true," she said, studying me with an intensity that made me uneasy. "If what you told me is accurate, you're the reason your grandson is alive." Her words made me swallow hard. I nodded toward the folder. "Everything's in there. Bills, statements, loan contracts, even the discharge papers from the hospital." She opened the folder carefully, her fingers brushing across the creased papers, as though they were something sacred. One by one, she read. The bank's logo, the astronomical numbers, my signature in shaky ink. She paused at the final receipt. $150, zero paid. Balance, zero. Her eyes lifted. "This is solid. You weren't exaggerating." "I wouldn't," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "I didn't save that boy for glory. I did it because he's my blood. My daughter, she may not see that anymore, but I do." Sarah leaned back, processing. Around us, the calf buzzed with quiet chatter. But between us, there was only silence, heavy with truth. "Max," she said, "finally this story will break hearts. But it might also break your family beyond repair. Are you certain you want me to publish it?" I stared down at my calloused hands. I thought of Emma's cold eyes, the way she'd told me I wasn't worthy. I thought of my grandson's tiny heartbeat under the hospital monitors. "I've already been erased," I said. "What more can they take? Let the world know what really happened. If I can't be part of my grandson's life, at least he'll grow up knowing the truth someday." Her expression softened. "You're braver than you think, Max." She tapped the folder gently. "I'll start drafting. But I'll need more your voice, your memories, your side of the story in detail. People don't just want numbers, they want to feel your heart." I nodded, a weight lifting and settling all at once. "Then I'll tell you everything." For the first time in months, I sipped coffee and didn't taste bitterness. Maybe this was how justice began, not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with truth spoken aloud and someone finally listening. Sarah clicked her recorder on, setting it gently on the calf table between us. "All right, Max. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me how it all unfolded." I took a deep breath. My throat felt dry, but the words came anyway, like water from a cracked dam. "It started the night the phone rang," I began. Emma's voice was frantic. She said the baby, my grandson, was in critical condition. They needed emergency surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover all of it, and the hospital needed a guarantee fast. $150,000. Sarah leaned forward, pen racing across her notebook. "And you agreed immediately. What father wouldn't?" I said, quietly. "I didn't even think. I sold the last of my savings bonds, drained my retirement account, and when that wasn't enough, I went to the bank. I signed away everything I had. By sunrise, the hospital had their money. By afternoon, my grandson was in surgery." I paused, eyes blurring at the memory of those long hours in the waiting room. The antiseptic smell, the endless pacing, the prayers whispered to a ceiling that never answered back. When the doctor finally came out, I continued. He said the surgery was a success. That little boy had pulled through, and in that moment, it felt worth it. Every dollar, every sleepless night. Sarah's voice softened. But then things changed. I nodded, bitterness curling at the edges of my words. The gratitude lasted maybe a week. After that, Emma grew distant. I'd call. She wouldn't answer. I'd stop by with groceries. She'd act like I was intruding. Then one day she said it outright, that I wasn't good enough, that my presence was a burden. Can you imagine to save a life and then be treated like the disease? Sarah's pen slowed. She looked at me, eyes shining with something between pity and outrage. "Max, this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about the value of sacrifice in a world that forgets too quickly." I shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a story about an old man who gave everything and ended up with nothing." "No," she said firmly, tapping the recorder. "This is about truth. And people will listen. Her conviction made me uneasy, but also lighter, like someone was finally carrying a corner of my burden. Then she asked, "Would you allow me to reach out to others' doctors, the bank, maybe even Emma and her husband? I need to cross-check your story for credibility. That means they'll know I'm digging." The idea made my stomach twist. If Emma found out, if her husband twisted it further, I might lose even the tiny thread that still connected me to my grandson. But I realized something I'd already been cast aside. Staying silent hadn't saved me. I met Sarah's gaze. "Do what you need to. Let the truth come out." She nodded slowly, scribbling one last note before closing her book. "This is only the beginning, Max. The story may rattle cages, but it might also open doors you never expected." As I left the cafe, the air felt heavier. Somewhere deep down, I knew the storm was coming. And this time, it would not pass quietly. Nights at the hospital grew longer as Jacob's recovery stretched on. The beeping machines, the faint smell of disinfectant, the squeak of nurses' shoes down the corridor, it all became part of the rhythm of my days. I sat by his bedside whenever I was allowed, whispering little stories into his ear, even though he was too young to understand. "Grandpa's right here, buddy," I'd murmur, watching, but the deeper Jacob healed, the further away Emma seemed to drift from me. At first she'd thank me quickly in passing, her eyes tired but soft. Then her words shortened, her glances sharper, like each moment with me was an inconvenience she hadn't budgeted for. One afternoon I found her sitting in the cafeteria, her phone pressed to her ear, voice low and tense. When she hung up, I sat across from her. She didn't smile. "She didn't, Emma," I said. "Gee," she sighed, setting down her plastic dad look. "You've done enough. More than enough. But people are starting to talk. The nurses, the neighbors, even Daniel's boss heard about what you did. It makes us look," she hesitated, chewing her lip. "It makes us look pitiful. Like we can't handle our own lives without you swooping in." As some, the words hit harder than she intended. I felt my face grow hot. Pitiful, was that what my sacrifice? I stared down at my calloused hands, the same hands that had rebuilt engines for 30 years, the same hands that had signed loan papers and checks until they cram. "I never wanted to embarrass you," I said quietly. "I only wanted to make sure my grandson." Emma looked away, her jaw tight. "I know," she whispered. "But sometimes I wish you'd kept it quiet. Not everyone needs to know how deep in debt you went. It doesn't help us." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Debt wasn't some shame I wanted to parade around. But debt had saved Jacob's life. And the fact that my own daughter couldn't see the difference tore something inside me. That night when I got home, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. The bills sat stacked beside me, reminders of every sacrifice scribbled in black ink. And I wondered, not for the first time, if maybe I had become the fool in this story. A fool who gave too much. But somewhere deep inside, I also knew this. A truth like mine, buried in silence, had a way of clawing its way back into the light. And soon someone else would help it surface. It was 2 mornings later when the knock came. Not the hurried rattle of a neighbor asking for sugar. Not the polite double tap of a mailman. This one was steady, deliberate. Like whoever stood outside my door already knew I was there. I shuffled to the door, half expecting it to be Emma, maybe even Daniel. But when I opened it, a woman stood there with a leather satchel hanging from her shoulder, her press badge clipped to the strap. She was young, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that scanned everything in an instant, the kind of eyes that had been trained to notice what most people overlook. "Mr. Harris?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "That's me." She extended her hand. Samantha Green, Boston Globe. "I'd like to talk with you if you have a moment." The name carried weight. The Globe wasn't some tabloid. They didn't come sniffing around unless they thought there was a real story. I frowned. "Talk with me about what?" Her gaze softened. "About what you did for your grandson. I've spoken with a few people already, nurses, neighbors, even one of the doctors. They say you took on over $150,000 in debt just to keep that boy alive." I felt my chest tighten. Emma's words echoed in my head. People are starting to talk. She was right. But the shame she feared wasn't the same as what this woman saw. Samantha wasn't looking at me like I was pitiful. She was looking at me like I was something else. Look, I said gruffly, I'm no hero. I did what any grandfather would do. Not everyone would, Samantha replied gently. And that's why your story matters. Because right now, people are drowning in medical bills across this country. Families are breaking apart. And here's a man who gave everything, even his own future, to save a child. Don't you think people should hear that? I leaned against the door frame, my hands rough against the wood. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut, retreat back into my quiet, tired kitchen. But another part, the part that had sat in that hospital cafeteria listening to Emma call my sacrifice pitiful, that part wanted the truth out. You think it'll change anything? I asked, my voice low. Samantha's eyes didn't waver. Maybe not the system, but it might change how people see fathers like you, grandfathers like you. It might even change how your own family sees you. I let her words hang in the morning air. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in a long time: power. Not money, not status, but the power of truth. Finally, I stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in, Ms. Green. You want the story, then you'll hear it all. Every last piece of it. And as she walked inside, notebook ready, I knew one thing for certain: silence had protected no one. But maybe, just maybe, my voice still could. Samantha sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten oatmeal every morning for years, the same one I'd polished until the wood had gone dull. She pulled out a small recorder, asking with her eyes if it was all right to turn it on. I nodded. Tell me about that night, she said softly. The night your grandson was rushed to the hospital. I drew in a slow breath. My hands clenched, not out of anger, but from the weight of memory. It was past midnight. I began, my voice rough. Phone rang. Emma was sobbing, words tumbling out: ambulance. I see you, something wrong with the boy's lungs. I drove faster than I ever had in my life. By the time I got there, the doctors were already talking in numbers. Blood oxygen, ventilator, survival odds. I didn't understand most of it. What I did understand was that without immediate treatment, he wasn't going to make it. And without money, treatment wasn't going to happen. Samantha's pen scratched across the page, though her eyes never left mine. What went through your mind? She asked. I let out a hollow laugh. What do you think? I thought I don't care if I have to sell every tool in my garage, every memory in my house. I'll get him what he needs. That's what love is, isn't it? Not words, not promises, just action when it costs you the most. The recorder caught the tremor in my voice, the silence between sentences. I told her how I signed the hospital forms, how the clerk gave me that look, half pity, half disbelief, when I handed over my checkbook. I told her about the nights I slept in the waiting room, curled in a chair with my coat pulled tight, eating vending machine crackers, while machines kept my grandson alive. And then I told her about the day Emma pulled me aside. She didn't hug me, didn't even say thank you, I said quietly. She just looked me dead in the eye and said, Dad, maybe it's best if you don't come around so much. Daniel thinks well. He thinks you remind us too much of the debt. And honestly, it doesn't look right you being here when you can't even afford to take care of yourself. Samantha's brow furrowed, but she didn't interrupt. That cut deeper than the bills, I whispered. Deeper than the sleepless nights. My own daughter ashamed of me after I'd bought her child another chance at life. The room went still. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to fade. When Samantha finally spoke, her voice carried both steel and sorrow. Max, the world needs to hear that. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the recorder, that little plastic box now holding pieces of me I'd never dared to share. Then let them hear, I said. But make sure they understand one thing: money doesn't measure love, and poverty doesn't erase sacrifice. She clicked off the recorder, but I could tell the story had only just begun. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. Samantha had promised to call before it went live, but I woke up to my phone buzzing like a hive of angry bees. Notifications stacked one after another. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I saw the headline. The grandfather who paid $150 zero to save his grandson and was told he wasn't good enough. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at the glowing screen. My story. My words. My shame and sacrifice laid bare for the entire world to see. Within hours, strangers from places I'd never been were writing to me. Some said they cried reading it. Others told me they'd lived something similar parents forgotten once they had nothing left to give. A few sent prayers, others sent money, but most sent simple words, "You're not alone." It should have felt like a victory, but all I could think about was Emma. By noon, the phone calls began. Not from friends, but from her. 3 missed calls, then a text, "Dad. Why would you do this? You've humiliated us." I stared at her words, the same hands that once wrote me crayon love notes, now sending daggers through a phone screen. I didn't reply. Not yet. Later that evening, Daniel showed up at my doorstep. He didn't knock politely, he pounded like he was trying to break the door down. When I opened it, his face was red, jaw clenched so tight the veins in his neck bulged. You. He looked at him, this man who once swore to love my daughter, who once shook my hand asking for her blessing. All I did, I said steady as I could, was tell the truth. He laughed, bitter and sharp. Truth. You're twisting it. We never asked you to pay those bills. You forced yourself into this. For a moment, I almost broke. Almost let the shame wash over me again. But then I thought of that night. The beeping monitors, the frantic doctors, my grandson's pale face. Nobody forced me. I chose to love. And love is never a mistake. So I straightened my back, met his glare, and said the words I should have said months ago. You don't get to rewrite this. You can hate me, Daniel, but you can't erase what I've done. One day that boy will know who saved him. And when he asks, I'll look him in the eye and say I did. Daniel's fists curled, but he didn't swing. He just stood there, chest heaving, then turned and stormed off into the night. I closed the door, heart pounding. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being the poor man in the room. I was the man who told the truth. And now the world knew it too. Weeks passed after the article. Some days felt like victory, others like defeat. Emma stopped calling. Daniel, as far as I knew, swore I was dead to them. But strangers still wrote to me letters, emails, even handwritten notes slid under my door. I read them all, but one thought haunted me. What would my grandson know one Saturday morning as I fixed the hinge on the old shed door? A small voice called out from the gate. Grandpa, I froze. My hands trembled as I set the screwdriver down. Turning slowly, I saw him 8 years old, now hair sticking up the way it always had, backpack slung over his shoulder. Emma's boy. My boy. Grandpa, he said again, softer this time, as though testing if I'd turn him away. I knelt down the ground, cold against my knees, and opened my arms. He didn't hesitate. He ran full speed, crashing into me with a hug so tight it hurt. Mom says I shouldn't be here, he whispered into my shirt, but I wanted to come anyway. I saw the story. My friend at school showed me. I pulled back, searching his eyes. And what did you think? He bit his lip, then said words that undid me completely. I think you're my hero. I had held in tears through bankruptcy papers, hospital bills, and my daughter's rejection. But that moment broke me. The dam shattered. I wept, not from sadness, but from relief, pure, unshakable relief. He dug into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. A drawing. Me holding his hand in front of a giant heart. Underneath, in shaky letters, "Thank you, Grandpa, for saving me." I pressed it against my chest like it was the most valuable contract I'd ever signed. You don't owe me thanks, buddy, I managed, choking back tears. You just live. You live strong, you live kind, and you love better than the rest of us did. That's all I ask. He nodded solemnly, the way only children do when they promise something big. When Emma finally arrived, breathless, angry, embarrassed, she found us sitting side by side on the porch steps, laughing at a silly story he was telling. She opened her mouth to scold, but stopped. For the first time, she looked not at me, but at him, at the happiness on his face. Her anger faltered, just for a moment. I didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. I simply patted the step beside us. There's room here, Emma, I said softly. She didn't sit, not yet. But she didn't leave either, and that was enough for me. because in that moment I realized the truth. I hadn't sold my life's work for nothing. I hadn't been erased. The boy whose life I saved knew my worth. And as long as he carried it forward, my story, my sacrifice would never die.